Ladlam.
I might just continue on in that vein, I guess. Have you been asked to do modelling specifically on reforms to negative gearing? There's a number of on reforms to negative gearing. A number of options being discussed in the press, but what work is Treasury doing?
Look, I'll have to go back to my previous answer.
Like, the press always speculates, and as you know, the broader issue of tax reform and how the government might initiate reforms to make our tax system more growth-friendly is obviously a matter for current cabinet deliberation.
Senator Coleman, you did this to Senator Wong. We might as well have just let Mr Fraser have the morning off.
Senator Ladlam, I'll adjudicate. You ask the questions. The minister will answer them.
There's a long-standing
Take me
practice
outside
in
if you
relation
want
to
me.
these matters.
I'll go.
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So you were reported last week, and Senator Coleman, before you intervene, you're right that the media does speculate as part of its job, but we come here for answers directly from the source.
Well, I mean, the government hasn't made any decision in relation to these sorts of matters. The government is currently considering a number of options which are very much subject to the usual arrangements for cabinet deliberations. Obviously, once the government makes decisions on the way forward, once the government makes relevant announcements, I would expect us to be very heavily scrutinised on the reasons for those decisions and on why we believe it is the right and the best way forward. But until such time as we've made a decision, we've got to be able to have proper process internally within the cabinet so that we can actually make decisions in the right and proper way in the public interest.
Thanks, Senator Coleman. Mr Fraser, you reported last week as saying that Australia's system of negative gearing is relatively generous. I think they're the words that are attributed to you compared to other developed nations. So can you explain what you meant by that?
Sorry, last week?
Week or so. Australia's system of negative gearing is relatively generous compared to other developed nations.
I'm really not aware of.
Not aware of having said that.
No.
Okay.
I think you might be believing everything that's written in the newspaper, maybe.
No, Senator Coleman, I come here to try and validate some of the things that are written in the press, and it'd be appreciated if you would assist. Do you believe that Australia's system of negative gearing is relatively generous?
You're asking him for an opinion, and if you go back to the opening statement of the chair, officers should not be asked for an opinion. I mean, you're essentially asking for an opinion on policy rather than explanation on policy or detail of policy.
Anytime we ask for an explanation or detail, you take the question and deflect it. We seriously might as well have just given Mr Fraser the opportunity to work from home or take the day off.
There are certain rules and processes that are long-standing, and I just apply the same rules that Senator Wong used to apply.
Mr Fraser,
no. Everything's calm, and it will remain that. Everything's calm, and Senator Ludlam, if you just reframe your question to the Treasury.
Mr Fraser, how would you evaluate Australia's policies on negative gearing compared to comparable countries?
Look, I'm sorry, it's still what I said earlier. It's discussing things that are part of cabinet deliberations, and would be
that
inappropriate.
Potentially completely wipes out the entire process of budget estimates. If a government minister is considering something in cabinet, we can't even put basic questions.
Well, no, it doesn't actually. I completely reject that, because I mean, obviously, budget estimates is about scrutinising, the government's budget and the performance against budget, and but the budget is a collection of policy decisions that government has made. You're not asking questions here, with all due respect, about decisions that we've made that are reflected in the budget or in the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook or the government's performance against budget. You are asking questions about something that we may or may not be doing in the future
before we have actually
gone through the proper process of government. So, I mean, the purpose of estimates, obviously, is to scrutinise government in terms of the performance of government against what we have said we would do in the budget.
I'm asking questions of fact about Australia's existing tax system. I haven't asked any hypotheticals about what you may or may not do.
Senator Ludlam, I'll just go to Senator Wong.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. Thank you, Chair. Perhaps I could assist. Mr Fraser, there is an inquiry into tax deductibility submission from the Treasury of 18th January 2016, and page 7 of that compares interest deductibility and negative gearing in selected OECD countries and confirms the relatively generous position Australia has compared to other OECD. So perhaps you might assist, because these are fact-based questions, perhaps you could provide us with a bit of a discussion about the comparison between Australia's system and some of the OECD nations, some of which are referenced in your own department's submission to a House of Representatives inquiry.
Okay,
Is
well,
that helpful?
Senator Ludlam.
Well, we'll see if the Secretary is allowed to answer. Go ahead.
Senator Ludlam, I don't need the barbs, all right? Just
Wasn't
ask the
directed at you,
questions.
Senator
Ask the questions. And we'll just keep it to that, all right? Because that only inflames the issue, it politicises it, and it makes it difficult to run. So if you could just ask the question, please.
No, I'm happy for Senator Wong's
oh,
question.
well, sorry, the submission, we obviously stand by it, but really this is something that should be taken up with Mr Heffron. This is a very complex area, but I don't walk away from what's in that submission earlier this year, I think, but I'll stick with my view. It'd be inappropriate for me to give a comment.
What? It's inappropriate for you to
Senator
answer a question
Wong,
from a
Senator
senator,
Wong,
which is a factually based
Senator
question
Wong,
comparing Australia's tax regime with other OECD countries.
I'm
Mr.
standing
Fraser,
by what's in the submission.
that is not reasonable.
No, I'm saying we stand with what was in the submission.
Okay.
Well, which countries are more generous than Australia, less generous than Australia?
You should
How about
stop
that?
badgering the Secretary.
Well, you
Senator
should
Wong.
stop.
You're
You
being
should
quite
stop
inappropriate.
muzzling him.
Right, order. I would ask, if you want to interject, that you just ask to be able to given that opportunity. Senator Ludlam, you've got 30 seconds. No, we're going to his colleague.
Sometimes you see critiques of negative gearing and they tend to be ganged up next to capital gains tax exemptions, and the CGT discount and negative gearing work together to provide what some have described as a tax shelter, rather than tax deferment becomes tax avoidance. Australia, again, has one of the most generous capital gains exemption systems in the world. Do you have an idea of what the current cost of the CGT discount on investment properties is, if I could just confine my question narrowly, and how much it's increased year on year?
Look, I'm sorry, the answer is no. It's something that Mr Heffron and his people are better ask about.
Okay, can maybe then, that was fairly specific. What about a more general question? Can you explain the rationale for the discount? What economic benefits does it provide? Do we need it? What does it do?
The capital gains discount. Well, I wasn't here, but I understand the introduction of it was to encourage capital formation. It's a subsidy to encourage capital formation and through that growth.
Right. And do you think it is justified in 2016?
You're asking him for an opinion now on a matter of policy, if you're asking whether it's justified.
Okay. If you can wrap up, I'll go to your colleague.
No, shoot. No, go ahead.